President Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy meeting in Florida over the weekend, trying to close the gaps of a potential peace deal between Russia and Ukraine. The president sounding optimistic on where negotiations stand.
Our meeting was excellent. We covered, somebody would say 95%. I don't know what percent, but we have made a lot of progress on ending that war, which is really certainly the most deadly war since World War II, probably the biggest war since World War II.
Former Deputy National Security Advisor Victoria Coates joins me right now. Victoria, thank you so much. So President Trump says that the deal is about 95% done. President Zelenskyy says it's about 90% done. What is left in that final 5 or 10%?
Well, good morning. Good to be with you. I think that what we have is really this border issue on the east of Ukraine and that border with Russia. And so figuring out what's going to happen in that Donetsk region, what territory Ukraine may need to cede, what territory Russia may not claim, that's really where the give and take is. And the critical thing is that yesterday the president met with not only President Zelenskyy, but also had a critical phone call with President Putin. So he's the only person who's talking to both sides and hopefully can close either that 10% or 5% gap that's left.
Yeah, based off what we heard from both presidents yesterday, it appears that they are close to or already at a deal with security guarantees for Ukraine and also a plan to rebuild Ukraine. But you mentioned the conversation that President Trump had with President Putin yesterday. He said that it went well, that it was productive, and that Putin even offered to potentially, in the event that the war were to end, provide cheap energy for Ukraine. But President Zelenskyy isn't necessarily buying it. Take a look at this interview that will air tonight on Special Report.
Is there any indication that you see that Vladimir Putin wants peace by what he's doing or saying?
May not, be honest. And I don't see it because, first of all, I don't hear it publicly. His messages, he doesn't speak about peace. Now he doesn't speak. He says that he can go further. It's not the signals of peace.
Do you believe after the fighting ends, whenever that happens, that Russia actually wants Ukraine to succeed?
Well, I think President Zelenskyy could be forgiven after 4 years of war for not thinking that Russia's intentions for Ukraine are the best. And, you know, I think, yes, a successful Ukraine is actually in the best interests of Russia. Whether President Putin wants that personally, I don't know. But I think where the United States can play a really important role here is in doing those security guarantees that both President Trump and President Zelenskyy were talking about yesterday. And these are defensive measures. This isn't making Ukraine into some kind of predatory power that can attack Russia, but rather working on things like missile defense, where NATO can play that crucial role, and also border security for that eastern line down the border of Ukraine. So that's where I think we should focus our energies.
I want to switch gears now to the Middle East, with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu set to meet with President Trump today at Mar-a-Lago, and he's reportedly going to brief him on Iran. And there was some concerning news from Iran's president in the past couple days. If we can pull up this poll from the AP, where the quote was, "We are in a full-scale war with the U.S., Israel, and Europe. They don't want our country to remain stable." How do you anticipate President Trump reacting to that quote?
Well, I think what President Pezeshkian is actually at war with is his own economy. The Iranian currency hit a new low, which is saying something, yesterday against the U.S. dollar. I mean, it's basically in free fall. They've had to end all their subsidies of energy, of food. The Iranian people are taking to the streets. Their problems are internal. It actually isn't either Israel or the United States that's threatening them. It's their own mismanagement. So we'll see what happens. I mean, this is a historic, I believe, 6th visit by Prime Minister Netanyahu to the United United States this year alone. We are seeing an extraordinary degree of coordination between the United States and Israel on this issue after the 12-day war last spring, which was a decisive action against Iran. The Iranians know there's not much they can do if Israel and the United States feel they have to strike Iran. So they would be much better off to attend to their own internal problems and stop the provocative action and rhetoric against the United States and Israel.
Now, in regards to the war with Hamas, Israel's defense minister said last week that Israel is never going to leave Gaza, which would be a violation of President Trump's peace plan. The defense minister since walked that back a little bit, but he did say that Israel plans to have a permanent presence in Gaza, a military presence. Does that threaten Trump's peace deal?
I don't think so. I mean, what we have in Gaza, is this ongoing threat from Hamas. If Hamas disarms, and if the people, the Palestinians living in Gaza, are able to sort of take control of their own governance, there can be a reduced Israeli presence. But after October 7th, it's hard to see Israel completely forgoing security operations in Gaza. They cannot risk another terrorist attack like that. And, there were reports of, there's very bad weather in Gaza right now. The Palestinians living there are mostly still living in tents. Fox was reporting yesterday that this is quite an unfortunate, dire humanitarian situation. This can all change tomorrow if Hamas disarms. And you think of the aid that could flow into Gaza unfettered at that point and the rebuilding that could take place. It really is a question for the Palestinians living there, what kind of future they want.
Maybe the holidays, but President Trump certainly staying very busy on the foreign policy front. Victoria Coates, thank you so much for your time.
That he is. Thank you.